Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the question, how can we analyze the quality of instructional images? This ties back to our week 1 learning objective, where we're trying to look at some key theories. Right, today we're going to take a look at how Mayer's cognitive theory applies to instructional images. First off, I wanted to talk about finding images as an instructional designer. Right, you have a lot of options in today's day and age. The first option is always you can take photos yourself. If you have a very specific use case or a very specific purpose that you're trying to illustrate with your instructional photo, maybe you want to take it yourself or set up a shoot so that you can get the exact type of photo you're looking for. Or in more general cases, you can look for a published image online that matches the instructional purpose you have or the needs you have. There's also a variety of stock image libraries, right, that have just hundreds of different photos. Some of these have watermarks and you have to pay to unlock the full version. A lot of stock image libraries are free. A lot of presentation softwares now come with a library of stock images added, like the photo you see to the right is part of Microsoft's stock image library. Or I think they might use Bing stock image library. I'm not sure where they pull that from, but that's a great option. And finally, there are AI generated images that we can start to look at in certain contexts. These are a little newer, probably a little better for your decorative photos rather than your representational photos, right? AI doesn't do a great job of creating things to scale or properly. So, right, sometimes people are missing legs or missing arms. AI is not amazing yet, but it does do a great job of painting a scene or a picture. So it might be really good for some decorative photos. We'll look more at AI generated images the last week of this course. Now, once you find an image, one of the first things that is likely to pop in your head is, can I use this image, right? Am I allowed to use this? Do I have to pay someone? How does this copyright work? Well, I'm going to dive into a little bit of that for you guys today. There is a section of the U.S. Copyright Act on fair use, and I've included it here in our PowerPoint. Now, I know this is a wall of text. I'm going to talk over it, but if you'd like to read it in full, just pause the video. Okay, read through it. I know it's not the best practices to talk over a wall of text here, but I do want to highlight certain parts of this, this section. That's why I've included it. Okay, now the important thing to note is that you are allowed to use a copyrighted work, including images and that sort of thing, if we are doing a criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. Okay, in those situations, you are allowed to use copyrighted images if it is for a non-profit educational purpose. Okay, so I think those are the big two chunks that apply to us in our field as teachers, as instructional designers, as administrators. Okay, you are allowed to use images in your teaching, and you're allowed to make multiple copies if the teaching is for nonprofit educational use. Okay, so once you start making a profit, if you're using it in a textbook that you're planning on selling, if you were offering a training that you were selling to the public, okay, the copyright rules get a little stricter, so you got to be careful there. You might have to buy some rights to things. But in nonprofit educational purposes, okay, in-house instruction, maybe a conference where you're not making any money by being there, you're just talking about different ideas, you are allowed to use images. Okay, and you're allowed to use them even if they're copyrighted, as long as you are honoring the copyright holder. Okay, you're going to have to cite them, but you can use them freely if they're made available to you. Okay, so the Fair Use Act there, something that is important that you should know about. So whenever you're considering using those images, just stop and think, is this okay? Well, if I'm using it in my teaching and I'm using it for nonprofit educational purposes, chances are you're fine. Okay, and just make sure you cite them as best you can, which will take us into our next slide. Okay, when talking citations, always look them up when in doubt. I must have looked up the APA requirements to cite something thousands of times, right, in my school career. Just when in doubt, look it up. The format is pretty similar to other APA citations. They do recommend including the type of media. So that's probably the only thing different there, right? But we have our last name, then first name, the year, okay, pretty standard. The title, pretty standard. The type of media, and then the website name and URL. So here's an example from a game-based learning course in the spring where I was a newer teacher and I was using all these images I pulled from different parts of the internet. So I was really worried about citations. So I tried to do a good job here, but here's an example of, right, our citation for my instructional image there. Okay, so now we've found a photo. We figured out that we can use it, and we've recorded a citation, right? So now what? Well, now we got to get that photo ready for use in our instructional materials. So we can think back to week 1. Mayer gave us a checklist, right? He gave us 5 principles for reducing extraneous processing, right? Trying to cut down on that extraneous load. And we're going to take a look at these and figure out how to apply these to our instructional images to make them better. Now, the first principle, okay, hopefully this is review here, coherence. The coherence principle simply states we want to remove extraneous material, right? Material that doesn't need to be there, extra content that is not part of the core lesson. For signaling, we want to use cues to highlight essential information. Redundancy, okay, we want to use graphics and narration over graphics, narration, and text, right? We want to cut out that redundant text when necessary. That's what redundancy principle is all about. Spatial contiguity principle. Okay, we want to group corresponding words and pictures together. Okay, we don't want them separate if they're related. And then finally, the temporal contiguity principle, right? The time. We want to present corresponding words and pictures simultaneously. Okay, so we have these 5 principles. Let's adapt them a little bit. I want to turn them into more of a question format so that we can take a look at instructional images and kind of go through a checklist. Okay, so that's what we'll take a look at next. So if we were to make those questions into a checklist, or sorry, those items into a checklist, for coherence, what are we asking? We're asking, is there unnecessary text or visuals in this picture that can be removed? For signaling, we're going to ask ourselves, can we add highlighting to the picture to make the focus stand out? For redundancy, we're always asking ourselves, is there any text that can be removed that we can talk about verbally instead of visually, right? Because we want those visual receptors working on that picture rather than processing a lot of text. For spatial contiguity, ask yourselves, are words near their corresponding visual element, right? Are the labels in the appropriate spot, or are they way off to the side, right? Does the user have to look back and forth to a key, right? That sort of thing. And then finally, temporal contiguity. Are related words and visuals presented concurrently, right? Are they presented at the same time, or are they presented at different times? So that's what we want to look at when we're looking at instructional images. That's what we want to kind of check with ourselves. And then we can always make edits to kind of tweak some of this. And we're going to take a look at that next. So starting off, we have a photo. I have a representational photo here of some elephants. And we want to ask ourselves our different questions from our checklist. And then we want to think, is there editing that we can do? Is there a secondary structure we can add to kind of address these issues? Okay, so our first example, we're looking at coherence. Is there unnecessary text or visuals that can be removed? Well, if I'm looking at these elephants, I wouldn't say anything is too distracting here. I think it's a pretty good picture. Okay, we don't have a ton of extra stuff in the background that might distract the user, but we do have quite a bit of a background here, right? It's a large background. So the only thing that pops into my head that we could clean up here is we could cut down some of that background, right? We don't have a lot going on in the sky or the ground that's distracting, but it is there, and we could cut it down if we really wanted to focus in on our primary structure here, right? Those elephants. So we could, in this scenario, use cropping to go from a photo with a big background with a lot going on to one with much less background that's much more focused on our elephants. Next, if we take a look at signaling, okay, can we add highlighting to this picture to make our focus point stand out? Well, here let's look. We have a picture of one elephant. Maybe our focus point is the elephant's tusks, right? We're doing a lesson on tusks and ivory and poaching, and right, we're talking about all this great stuff, but we want to add signals to really show students where are the tusks, right? Well, that's something you can add secondary structure, right, to add our signaling in. We've talked about before. We can add arrows, we can add circles. So we can add that signaling in, right, using that editor, or even using our presentation software. Okay, these arrows I added in PowerPoint. But once again, we're thinking about Mayer's principles and what editing and what add-ons we can make to really make these principles stand out in our instructional images. Okay, so here we added some signaling. Next, let's look at redundancy, right? Is there any text that can be removed that we can talk about verbally instead? Well, maybe you have your elephants and you have your big description on elephants. Okay, so I asked AI what an elephant is, and it told me all this great stuff, right? But maybe you don't want your user to read that, because then their eyes are bouncing back and forth from the visual and what they're reading, right? So we get that conflict in our visual pathway. So according to the redundancy principle, well, this can be read out loud, right? You can have your teacher notes to the side that have information on elephants, okay? Or maybe you just maybe you just talk about elephants off the cuff, but we definitely don't need this wall of text. So that's our redundancy principle, right? We can take away that extra text and we can talk about things verbally instead. Next, spatial contiguity. Are words near their corresponding visual element? I think the biggest place this comes up is when we have labels or we have diagrams with things like keys off to the side, right? Whenever possible, we want to just line up our visual with our label, okay? So if we're going to talk about the tusks of an elephant, don't put it at the top of the picture, right? That's a little confusing. Is the whole elephant the tusk, right? If you're brand new to elephants, that you might not know. You might think this is an animal called tusk, right? But just by relocating that label, now we're following that spatial contiguity principle. The label in our text is right near that visual element that we're talking about, right? So just little ways to kind of clean up these instructional images, right? Instead of having our label up here, let's put it where it's supposed to be, right next to the image we're talking about. And finally, our temporal contiguity principle. We want to present words and visuals concurrently, okay? So if you're doing a slide deck, don't do one slide where you're talking about that elephants have tusks, and then the next slide show a picture of an elephant, right? Instead, let's present that information at the same time. Let's make these two slides into one, and even adding a label in there to really illustrate our point there. So that's temporal contiguity. Instead of presenting this information separately, right, let's present them at the same time. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. I just wanted to review the Mayer's principles that apply to images today. Okay, we'll get into the rest of the principles when we start talking about presentations and adding speech as well. As far as remaining tasks for today, there is, once again, no reading, okay? Nothing crazy new today. There are a couple options to extend your learning. I have a video on how to use copyrighted images, okay, that has like a little flow chart on are you allowed to use it, are you not allowed to use it, so you can check that out if you work in maybe a for-profit educational environment. That might be really good to check out. I also have just a video that shows you some free stock photo websites. Okay, there's a lot of those out there today. Most of the time, I just use the one that's built in a PowerPoint or just a quick Google search. But if you're looking for stock photo libraries, you can check out that video, and they got 12 links there that are pretty good. We do have a practice quiz, so check out quiz 3.1 if you want to see how well you've kind of learned today's info. And our assignment this week is a discussion. So go ahead and work on discussion 6. And we're going to cut to that now and take a look at what that entails. Okay, here we have discussion 6, right? Today's assignment. And today's assignment is essentially 2 parts, okay? The first part is a photo submission. So you're going to submit 3 photos as your post this week. One will be an instructional photo that you have taken. One is a published photo that you found online that could be used in instruction, in case you're looking for a published photo. And then one is a stock image that could be used in instruction. Okay, with the published photo and the stock image, please include that citation for me. Okay, even if it's not needed by the stock image library, just include that citation just for the practice. Okay, so you're going to submit your 3 photos, your 2 citations, and then your peers are going to reply. So the second part, our analysis section, we're going to reply to 2 of our classmates. Okay, we're either going to give them constructive feedback on how to improve their images, or if their image is doing a great job of Myers principles, okay, we're just going to give them feedback on how it's doing a good job, right? Describe it. What is it doing that is illustrating these principles, right? And we're going to talk about the same principles as our checklist in that video, right? Coherence, signaling, redundancy, and the 2 contiguities. I know some of these might not be super relevant yet. Some of them might fit a little better once we get into presentations, right? Things like the temporal contiguity. But check them out. Think about these concepts. Maybe there's something we can add here, like adding in our labels, adding in our words ahead of time, so that way once we get to the slides, we don't have to worry about it. But yeah, these are the big 5 I want you to think about while we're looking at these photos of our classmates. And there is a grading breakdown at the end, so in case you're curious, you guys have all been doing a great job so far. We're getting 2 points for each photo and citation as well, and then 2 points for each reply here. Okay, so that's our grading breakdown. But yeah, so check that out this week, or today, I should say. We're submitting 3 photos, and then we're just analyzing them based on Myers principles. Okay, and we'll kind of do this each Monday after a project to kind of go over, right, images, presentations, and then videos. Okay, and we'll tie everything back to Myers principles. Yeah, so that's what I have for you guys today. As always, let me know by email or on Canvas if you guys need anything, and then have a wonderful week.